What starts as teaching values often ends in silencing questions. Here's how Catechism blurs the line between faith and indoctrination. Catechism is one of those religious words that sounds harmless, maybe even sweet. It brings to mind pictures of kids in Sunday school holding little books, learning how to be good people. But if you dig a little deeper, Catechism isn't just about learning values. It's about teaching people what to believe and how to believe it, often without room for questions. Is that always bad? Not necessarily, but Catechism walks a fine line between education and indoctrination, and too often it crosses that line. What exactly is catechism? Catechism comes from a Greek word, katechio, meaning to teach orally. It's been around for centuries. The idea is simple: break down the religion's teachings into clear questions and answers, so people can learn them step by step. The Catechism of the Catholic Church, CCCC, published in 1992 under Pope John Paul II, is the official reference for Roman Catholic doctrine. It's nearly 900 pages long and covers everything from the Ten Commandments to sexuality to the afterlife. Catechism's roots may seem innocent enough, but its modern-day application often veers into troubling territory. What starts as a well-intentioned effort to educate the faithful can too easily become a tool for indoctrination and the suppression of critical thinking. At the heart of catechism is the practice of rote memorization. Students are expected to commit vast swaths of doctrine to memory, word for word. This approach has its origins in medieval scholasticism, which prized the mastery of authoritative texts above all else. The assumption was that by perfectly reciting the teachings of the Church, one could achieve a deeper understanding and connection to the faith. But memorization alone does not equal true understanding. By focusing so heavily on verbatim recall, catechism classes can stifle the natural human impulse to question, analyze, and debate. Students are trained to regurgitate the right answers, not to think for themselves. This is especially problematic when the material being memorized includes not just theology, but rigid moral edicts and uncompromising stances on social issues. Children are indoctrinated from a young age to accept the Church's position as absolute truth, with little room for nuance or independent reasoning. One need only look at the Catechism of the Catholic Church to see this in action. Within its nearly 900 pages, there are detailed prescriptions on everything from the sanctity of life to the sinfulness of homosexuality. Students are expected to internalize these doctrines, not to critically examine the reasoning or evidence behind them. This creates a troubling dynamic where faith becomes less about a personal, evolving relationship with the divine and more about the mastery of a predetermined set of beliefs. Questioning or dissenting from those beliefs is frowned upon, if not outright forbidden. Over time, this breeds a mentality of unquestioning obedience, a core tenet of indoctrination. Catechism classes are often presented as a forum for students to engage with their faith and choose to accept its teachings. But in reality, the deck is stacked heavily in favor of conformity. The questions and answers are crafted by religious authorities, not the students themselves. The curriculum is tightly controlled, with little opportunity for open-ended discussion or exploration of alternative viewpoints. Even when students are invited to ask questions, the implicit message is clear. The answers are already known, and deviating from them is tantamount to rejecting one's faith. This creates a dynamic where choosing to believe the Church's doctrine feels less like a free, autonomous decision and more like the only viable option. Doubts and dissent are actively discouraged, if not outright condemned. Over time, this breeds a mentality of unquestioning obedience, a core tenet of indoctrination. Perhaps the most insidious aspect of catechism is the way it can erode critical thinking skills. By prioritizing rote memorization and doctrinal adherence over independent analysis, it trains students to accept authoritative pronouncements at face value, rather than subjecting them to rigorous scrutiny. This pattern extends far beyond the religious sphere. Students who are conditioned from a young age to simply accept what they're told without questioning the reasoning or evidence behind it, can struggle to apply critical thinking in other areas of life. They may be less equipped to detect logical fallacies, to evaluate the credibility of sources, or to form their own nuanced opinions on complex issues. In an era of misinformation and echo chambers, these skills are more important than ever. Yet catechism, in its current form, often works to undermine them, shaping minds to be more receptive to dogma than to independent analytical thought. The ramifications of this catechism-driven erosion of critical thinking extend far beyond the individual. When entire generations are trained to prioritize doctrinal adherence over independent reasoning, it can have profound consequences for the health of democratic society. After all, the bedrock of a functioning democracy is an informed, engaged citizenry, one that can critically evaluate information, weigh competing viewpoints, and make thoughtful, autonomous decisions. But if catechism instills a mindset of unquestioning obedience, it can leave people vulnerable to manipulation, misinformation, and the siren call of authoritarianism. History has shown how religious indoctrination can pave the way for totalitarian control, as people are conditioned to accept the edicts of a small elite as unassailable truth. And in an age of rising religious nationalism and the blurring of church-state boundaries, the threat of this dynamic playing out on a societal scale is all too real. To be clear, the problem is not with faith or religious education per se. Exploring one's spiritual beliefs can be a deeply meaningful and enriching experience. But when that exploration is constrained by rigid doctrine and the suppression of questioning, it ceases to be education and becomes indoctrination. The solution lies in rethinking the approach to catechism, moving away from rote memorization and towards more engaged, discussion-based learning. Students should be encouraged to grapple with the complexities of theology, to wrestle with doubts and uncertainties, and to develop the critical thinking skills necessary to make informed, autonomous choices about their beliefs. This is not an easy path. It requires religious institutions to relinquish some of their top-down control and trust their adherents to navigate their faith journeys with greater agency and independence. It means embracing a more nuanced, pluralistic understanding of doctrine, where diverse perspectives are welcomed rather than dismissed. But the stakes are high. If we continue down the current road of catechism as indoctrination, we risk producing generations of believers who are intellectually stunted, ill-equipped to navigate the modern world, and ultimately, more vulnerable to manipulation and extremism. The choice is ours. Will we allow catechism to remain a tool of brainwashing, or will we transform it into a vehicle for truly enlightened, empowered faith? The future of critical thinking, and perhaps even the future of our societies, may hang in the balance.